We're now officially recording. Bill Wadman, good evening.
Good evening, Sandy. How are you?
Fine, thank you. How are
So,
you, Bill? Because
uh,
I'm concerned. The topics we're going to talk about tonight are quite serious topics, and we've already had a very long preamble.
yeah,
I just want to check in with you to make sure you're okay.
I think I'll survive. I think I'll be okay. I think I'll make it through the hour.
Okay.
Um, but I thought we were going to talk about like the Kardashians or something, and you're bringing all this heavy stuff. It's going to be fun.
Okay, and well, to that effect, I want to just say to make it really clear to everybody who has tuned in to watch, the line of looking this evening will have images that some viewers may find distressing. There are 3 images, and each of them has a particular sense of something that perhaps viewers might find challenging. And the presentation really is off the back of teaching I've done this past week to a group of students who are between sort of 15 and 16, talking to them about how they perceive particular types of images, linking also back into something we've already talked about, you and I, Bill, which is the right to photograph.
Yep.
The first image we're going to look at, and I'm just going to give it a preamble before we start fully and properly on the image, is an image by Don McCullin. It is a photograph that is titled, I'm just going to give you the exact title. It's a young Christian youth celebrating the death of a young Palestinian girl, Beirut, from 1976. So with that in mind, and if everybody is ready to proceed, here is the image.
Do you think that you would see this photograph differently without that title? I mean, the title is, to use a term we would use sometimes in America, loaded.
I think for me, the title in this case actually isn't, it's a very important title. I'm not trying to diminish the value of the title at all, but simply the fact that we can see there is a body lying on the street. Even if we don't know it's a young girl, even if we don't know it's a Palestinian girl, the fact is there's a dead body on that street. And there are people who look happy and celebratory, singing. So Don McCullin, as you know, one of my heroes, he's been all over the world. We cannot unsee some of the things he's seen. The reason I've given it the title, The Line of Looking, is that I'm very aware that all of us have particular tolerances. And I am fascinated by what point we reach where we can't look any longer, where we have to look away, and how long we can hold the gaze of the photograph, so to speak, when the photographs we look at really challenge us. Truthfully, this photograph, much as it is a disturbing photograph, I don't have to turn away from it so quickly.
Agreed.
That has no particular contextual reason. I suspect that visually it's because it's in black and white, and that helps me because it dissociates me from perhaps the reality a little bit of it, where in color I might feel different. But still, going into the image and spending time with this image, it's profoundly upsetting to know that somebody's child lies dead in front of these young men.
It's in when I see photographs like this, I find it interesting because, you and I can, there's two things, there's two directions I want to go. First is that, the kid holding what looks like a lute, kid holding a gun, the kid sort of it may be that they were, this isn't a value judgment in any way. It's sort of this picture is a split second of what was going on here. It could be that they were very serious and some friend of them down the street said, "Hey, Joe." And this kid looked up and, "Hey," like that it's not that they're celebrating the death of this person, but that's how it looks in the photo. I don't know. You know what I mean? Like it's very, uh, it's one of those things that like, we don't know what's going on in the heads of these people.
Well, I mean, I think, anybody who does know even just a fraction of the kind of political history of
Sure.
Lebanese civil war would know that there was an uprising really from kind of sort of 1975, although there had been previous sort of civil war uprisings and lots of destabilization, obviously, within the country.
Yep.
Warring factions, though alliances were, not set in stone, it was very much about a kind of Muslim Christian face-off.
Sure, of course, but I mean, that being the larger political picture, individuals are not photocopies of the larger political picture. And it's interesting to me though that you see a picture like this and you see a dead young girl, and we will, this young girl is remembered in some sad way because of a photograph like this is taken of her dead. But in this war, probably hundreds of thousands of people were killed, on both sides in all the things. And there aren't pictures of them. Isn't it funny how it's almost like the classic thing of, when the numbers get big enough, we stop caring.
Well, I mean, this civil war lasted really between 1975 and 1990. So it was long and drawn out, as many of these things are. An estimated 120,000 people died over that period, although of course numbers like that are often misreported. There'd be many, many more. And even as late as sort of 2010, there were still people who were displaced within the country as a direct impact from that civil war. But what I would say is that Don McCullin is celebrated as a war photographer, although he doesn't like that particular title, and he rallies against really the pigeonholing of photographers into particular types or classes. Nonetheless, he is, as I said, celebrated, one of the finest war photographers ever and living legend. He had been chucked out and barred from Vietnam at this point, which I suspect is why he was actually in Beirut, because he'd been covering Vietnam for quite a long time, and he'd been barred as a press reporter because of the images he took of the South Vietnamese army retreating. They didn't want him in the country anymore. So he came to Lebanon. And you're right, there are obviously over 100,000 people who could have.
You could multiply this picture by 100,000, you would have all those pictures of all the dead people. Yeah.
Now, the horror of that can't be underestimated. But this particular photograph, as with lots of images that are troubling and impactful in this way, rise beyond or come out from themselves and become emblematic of the wider situation. I mean, there's another image that I was looking at that I would have perhaps used instead of this one, and it's a very almost like the mirror angle of this scene with a tree, and it's a dead Palestinian woman under the tree in a city street, whilst people in the background are looting. And again, the title is something like Dead Palestinian Woman with Christian Looters or something. So again, you're right, the title is loaded, it's highly political, but it doesn't change the fact that in this image, there's a dead child, really.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, photographs like this and Nickut's photo of the napalm girl and like all these sort of photos from history that are of terrible war scenes,
Mm.
in some ways, like, you can look at photographs, say, or video or footage rather, film footage of, you know, concentration camps in Germany and Holocaust deaths and that kind of stuff. And in some ways, like, piles of bodies, it like almost like gets overwhelming and loses its meaning. Cambodia, killing fields, like all this kind of stuff. The larger sort of scenes, in some ways, a photograph like this, where there's a singular person, it ends up representing the 100,000 equal deaths. Like, oh, this is just one, and look how horrible this moment is. In some ways, it can give you the idea of the 100,000 even better than 100,000 dead people could. In some ways,
I mean, also, if kind of accounts are to be believed, McCullen had stayed here in this location long after he'd been asked to leave. So he was wandering around making photographs, and he had been asked to move on and get out of the way. And he didn't, he stayed and he got this photograph. So if that's to be believed as an account of what happened when he made the photograph, it's almost like it's the sense that it's behind the scenes. A lot of war photographs are kind of.
Wait, you're saying that this one in particular, or Don's work in general, or what are you saying?
I think a lot of his series in Beirut, actually, because there is a sense almost of like quietness between the gunshots, between the noises of war. Perhaps a noise of war is actually the silence. And here we have ringing out in the sound of the photograph that lute playing. The whole thing is so haunting. And just back to our title, The Line of Looking, actually, much as there is an aversion to what is seen, there's a mesmerizing quality, actually, to the image.
Sure. I mean, the lute player especially, it makes it almost surreal, right? I mean, it's just like, wait, what? It's interesting though that if you're looking at this photograph, do you hear the laughter of that kid in the middle? Do you hear somebody playing the lute? Do you hear the kid messing around with the AK-47? Like, do you hear the moment?
Yeah, I do, but that requires patience on my part, and I think that's again back to the sort of the topic, is that the reaction perhaps is to look away. There's a moment of interest, and then one realizes, shit, that's a body in the foreground. That's a body there. And then when one spends longer, in a gallery setting, perhaps, by the way, just off topic a little, but I did take a group of students, slightly younger students, to the Don McCullin exhibition at Tate. And it was fascinating not just to see the photographs, but to see those students with those photographs, because they were wandering around in age sort of, 14. And a lovely group of humans, I have to say. Thank goodness it was that group that were with me. And I had given, parents had given permission, and they knew the kinds of images.
We're going to go see war photos and things.
Yeah, so they knew that was going to be a thing. But I don't think certainly none of them had actually seen photographs in that kind of setting, where there was a very somber atmosphere in the rooms at Tate looking at these images. And also people, obviously they're beautifully printed and framed, and they're also at eye height for most people. And the sense of exchange between viewer and photograph, it was so kind of extraordinary. The being in that exhibition with those children, with those young people, was the experience, and realizing that they were having this moment where they were drawn to a photograph, and then they would realize what was actually in the photograph, and to watch them being repulsed, watch them being saddened, watch them being frightened, maybe even, certainly shocked. And then for the ones that could bear it, watching them overcome that to spend longer looking. And in spending longer looking, I myself with this photograph do then start, it's like, it is like sound suddenly happens. And then it's as if sort of either going into or waking from a dream, maybe. The idea that you move from one state to another. I mean, I have, of course, in my notebook, something that I would like to read that Mccullen said, not particularly about this photograph, but just generally about his work. He said that peace is more elusive. It's invisible and abstract. But as for war, it's in your face. You cannot see a dead person walk around it as if it were not there. It's there. It revolts you. But he then goes on to say, darkness to me is energy. So when I energize my prints in the darkroom, I inject more and more darkness into them. But I don't consider it darkness. I consider it strength. I want my pictures to be strong. I want them to punch you in the face when you go to look at them. And actually, I'm not sure I get punched in the face by Don McCullin's images when they're graphic. But then if I can bear it, if I can bear looking for longer, something else happens. I'm not going to call it magic because often he himself used the words revolting there. There is something so repulsive about looking at the dead who've been murdered in war.
Do you know, it's interesting that, I have a friend who I may or not have mentioned before who just recently went through a crazy medical thing. She had a bone marrow transplant. And I was thinking, this is off topic, but it's going to come back around. I was thinking about if I knew someone who was a teenager, who was 13, 14 years old, and they were in a situation that she was in, and they had leukemia, and they had to go through some crazy medical procedure that was going to be awful for 6 months, that there was a chance of them dying, that all of these things were true. And this person was 13, 14 years old. They're still a child, right? They don't understand mortality really yet. That, most of them, they just don't have that kind of experience. And that in some ways they would want to put their head in the sand and just say, no, I don't want to do that. If you gave me a choice, no, I don't want to have to go through this terrible thing. And I was thinking about it from the point of view of as if you were an adult trying to talk to someone like that into dealing with their feelings and sort of understanding what was happening to them and sort of thinking through it. And the sort of the place that I got to was to basically say to the child, listen, this thing that you're about to go through is awful. This thing that you're about to go through is going to change you in a lot of ways. Like, you are not going to be the same person at the other end of this as you are now because of what you're about to experience. But that by experiencing this, you will no longer be a child because you will understand things on a level that you won't get to understand until you're an adult. And a lot of adults don't even understand it at the level. Like, in some ways, you're going to gain wisdom from having been through this experience. And I could imagine going to a gallery and even showing children who maybe have never even thought about mortality or war, or the fact that that could be them dead on the ground if they were born in a different place at a different time, that for some of them, that was a transformative experience, because they never thought about it that way. And that for the rest of their lives, they may think back to that time that Mrs. Robertson took us to the Tate to go see those photographs, and how in some ways you could say that that is the power of a photograph like this one or others, where it can really change the viewer. You and I looking at them as, well, I'll speak for myself, old people. I've seen thousands of pictures of people dead. I've thought about it. I've probably overanalyzed it. I probably don't even take in a moment when I see them at this level, because I've already been through that mental pain and don't want to go through it again. So I have like my trite answer in my head of what that image means to me based upon the subject matter. Yeah, is that can you see change on their faces when you take a bunch of kids into something like that and then you take them home? Are they different at the end of that experience?
Well, like I said, I was very lucky with the people I did happen to take on that trip,
Yeah.
in that I already had very good teacher-student relationships with them.
And they were thoughtful people.
And they were lovely humans. They are lovely
Yeah.
humans. They're just doing their GCSEs this year. So this would have been 2 years ago at Tate I took them. And I do think some of them are very shaken by it.
Yeah. Do you think we need to be shaken by it, especially
Yeah.
people like us who live in the West and, or generally live these privileged lives where we don't have to think about being killed in the streets?
Does anybody have to face their fear, Bill? Thinking about
They
this,
don't have to, but they probably should.
I don't know what the should is, but all I know is that sometimes I can look at a photograph and I can feel such extraordinary sadness based on what I see. Now, I'm feeling sadness from the enormous comfort of my chair, and the image is reproduced and delivered to me neatly on my screen. And I don't have to engage if I don't want to.
Right.
And the kind of compulsion to engage with such things could be seen as a sort of macabre interest, something that's kind of a bit of a hobby of privilege, being able to look at the misfortune of others and yet not have to experience that misfortune oneself.
But what is the alternative? Just not see it at all?
Yet,
I mean,
not seeing it, I'm not sure this is always just about raising awareness of what's happening around the world. I think there's something else to it, which is about seeing what one might be capable of.
what humans are capable of.
Yes, well, we're all humans.
I mean, it is interesting though that the fact that you hear audio when you look at this, like it becomes a moving image in your head that you're in that moment. I have the opposite experience in some ways where I could imagine the moment it's in, but that the photograph is just a dead silent visual 2D representation of the reality.
Maybe it's more fragmentary than I've made it sound then in my mind. What I mean is that again, it's about the line that one crosses. Like, do I opt out of looking at this because what I see is profoundly upsetting? And if I choose yes, then I walk away and I might remember it, but I haven't gone into it. But if I stay with the image beyond where it's comfortable for me to stay, and I sort of invest in the image in some way. I don't know if this is imagination gone wild, but there is a sense that one becomes the image. I don't mean that I feel like I'm there as such. It's much more fragmentary and fragmented than that. But yeah, there is a sound. There's a sound of what would be generated in the aftermath of, for example, gunfire. The quiet, that silence, quite literally a sort of tumbleweed moment. Yep. And the sound of the loot and the shouting and the laughter of those boys. And all of that builds up and it becomes almost like a crescendo. And I realize then the crescendo is not the sound, but rather is my emotion at seeing all of this, seeing the joyousness of those young men. And also very difficult, but so important, is to not rush in to judge them, is to not rush in to judge them and to say, aren't they evil, wicked bastards? How dare they? Well, I can say that my reaction would be quite naturally, how dare they, the disrespect of this.
Yeah.
But I suspect that's rather limited of me to say that and too simplistic. It's a very complex situation that we find ourselves here looking at.
I think making judgments about, I mean, I'm assuming that these people are not the people who killed the girl. You know,
It doesn't appear that way, but I suppose
right.
that they are part of the faction that would support the killing of this girl.
Maybe. Yeah. But I don't like, I think it's difficult even making that leap, you know, because honestly, we have no idea. It could be that the past 16 days have been war zone around them and there's dead people outside of the shot all over the place. And these 6 kids think, oh my God, we survived and we didn't get killed ourselves. And they're, you know what I'm saying? Like, we have no idea. Like, or at least I have no idea. I don't know these 6 people.
Well,
And I think when in war zones and stress and the people, like, it is so complicated laying blame and the complexities of war. It's, you know, it's just awful. You know, what is it? War is hell, right? You know, that's the classic.
You know that I've put gaps between the pictures. And again, that is because I think, you know, perhaps we do need a break from these kinds of images. And also I would like to have the chance to say to anybody who's watching that the next image is an image that has been widely used across, you know, really all news outlets since 2015. It is a photograph of the toddler Alan Kurdi that's coming up next, and he is the toddler that was washed up on the beach near Bodrum in Turkey. The next image is one that I find very difficult to stay with. So I've selected the image purely selfishly for me that I can bear the longest, which in itself is a very interesting thing and also a very shaming thing. Shame on me. How dare I look away from it? So if it's okay to change and to move on.
Do you have a different feeling about photographs like this because it's the body of a child and not the body of an adult? Like that there is, yeah, yes? Okay.
Undoubtedly. Mm-hmm.
Because there is, I don't know, some promise or opportunity lost in the death of a child that is different than the death of an adult? Like they never
Maybe,
had a
but
chance,
also
sort of thing?
it's very simple, and it's a very standard answer, I'm sure, is that this doesn't define me as somebody who knows more or is in any way better than anybody else. But I am going to pull out the card that says I am a mum and I do have a child. And I think in this particular image, you know, my child would be the same age as this little boy, just about. And I remember seeing it for the first time and immediately being sent into a space where I imagined what that would be like were it my child. And further to that, knowing that this little boy's mum and his brother, his baby brother, also drowned. This photographer, this young woman, Nilüfer Demir, is a Turkish photojournalist. She's worked for, I think, please forgive me, anybody watching who knows better than this, I think she'd worked for quite a small scale Bodrum-based newspaper all of her working life. She's probably about 34, 35 now. She's maybe not been used to photographing things like this, but she had started to document the migrant crisis that had become so much part of our everyday news following the kind of Arab Spring and people displaced from Syria, especially. Although, of course, now it's shone a light on all other migrant crises in the Mediterranean. But this photograph, she said herself, she was petrified upon seeing the corpse of the toddler. She was petrified. She was so frightened. And she, I don't think, had the capacity really to get this photograph out as widely as possible, but she tweeted it. And it was immediately that day, it was just whizzed around the world, this photograph, and it appeared the next day in all the papers. The family wanted to get to Canada. There's lots of stuff about their application for asylum to Canada, caused all kinds of political problems. Anyway, that's not really that important. The thing that is important is that I think this photograph brought me to my line where I didn't want to look. It was too much to look.
It's interesting that you're talking about the photographer and the intensity of their emotions and sort of the what they were feeling in this moment. I look at this photo and I think about this guy who had to pick up the child. I mean, whoever that officer is, to me, seeing that child is one thing. Holding that child and having that be your job, you know, that's sort of the primary experience to some extent to me. And the fact that it's probably a number of dead people that he had to deal with over the weeks and months.
Well, the boat that this family were in had a capacity of 6. And I think there were 12 or 15 people in the boat.
Right.
And I'd been given life vests that were faulty. And they were trying to make the journey to Kos, which is only like 5 kilometers across from Bodrum. And they were only in the water for minutes before they were in trouble.
Yeah.
I can't remember for sure, but I think this wee boy's little brother was just a babe in arms, a very young baby. And imagining the mother, who by all accounts had a terror of open water, taking this journey, agreeing to this journey. And then
how bad it must have been where they were leaving for them to take the chance that they were trying to take.
Do you know, there's a lot of stuff has cropped up from this. A lot of very negative press about the dad. People accusing him of being money grubbing, selling this little boy's belongings to a museum in Paris. There was a bit of a backlash, actually. I also want to read something that I find very disturbing, but perhaps I am the kind of person this columnist is referring to. It's a columnist called Brendan O'Neill, who is sort of famed and notorious for his controversial views on what we might think of as current affairs or cultural topics of now. I don't know if I could do an accent. I'm not going to try. He says the global spreading of this snapshot is justified as a way of raising awareness about the migrant crisis. Please. It's more like a snuff photo for progressives, dead child porn, designed not to start a serious debate about migration in the 21st century, but to elicit a self-satisfied feeling of sadness amongst Western observers. I'm a Western observer. I'm certainly not self-satisfied in looking.
I mean, there's this, I don't think a larger question of what is this photograph for? What is this photograph going to change? I feel like the people on either side of whatever political debate is involved with refugees from war-torn countries or, crazy poverty, or in the Americas, people from El Salvador and all the rest of it coming up through Mexico to the southern border is like the big thing that we talk about here in America. I don't think that the people on either side of that line, the people who want to, excuse me, the people who want to help the refugees feel like this is evidence of, oh, we need to do something. Look at this horrible situation that's going on. The people who don't want to do anything about refugees because they feel like it will be a burden on them or whatever the political thing is. I don't think they're going to be swayed either. You know, I think in some extent that writer is right in the sense that being outraged by a photograph like this kind of thing happens whether a photograph is taken of it or not. If you need a photograph to understand that this kind of stuff happens, then I feel like you're thinking small and have your head in the sand anyway. So he's got something of a point of sort of like, oh, I'm virtue signaling that I am really upset about this child dying. And it's like, well, yeah, millions of children die every day, every year around the world for all kinds of things that you do nothing about or can't do anything about or don't have the power to do anything about.
Just as we were talking in that McCullen shot about, or I was saying that, you know, the girl on the ground becomes a symbol for all the people. Now, what did this photograph do? Well, actually, as is the case, and maybe out of guilt, but the fact is that donations to certain charities tripled within hours.
Okay, that's fine. But did that money actually make the situation on the ground for those people any better? Or was it just a bunch of money that went to charities? Like, money's not always the answer in any of these kinds of things. It's like the stuff going on in India right now. It's just like with the coronavirus, it's like, yeah, tons of people are dying. Tons of people are sick. All right, we'll give money to it. Well, money's not what they need. What they need is, oxygen, which they can't get, or vaccines that they can't get because they're not available. It may be that like it makes us feel better to donate, and that's what people do. But is it changing the war situation in Syria? No. Is it going to make it so that there's going to be less people who need to get out of that country because they're going to be killed or die a slow death otherwise? No, because somebody in England or somebody in America or somebody in Germany feels bad about it. It's like, it's a weird sort of, it's like this like weird like impotence, you know what I mean? It's like I'm so desperate to do something about it, and yet I have very little power to actually do anything about it.
That doesn't mean one shouldn't do something. I'm not in any way justifying the action or inaction of any other people here. I'm thinking very particularly about a photograph that one can and cannot look at. This photograph had, I think, purpose. And it did have a kind of measurable outcome in as much as I've said, donations to charities that support migrants or that some way, help. It's not enough. Of course, it's not enough. But it's something. I don't think, in my own case, having donated to charity after seeing this photograph, I felt any better.
You don't know that you did?
No, I don't. I didn't.
Yeah.
Didn't feel any better.
But did you think that it would?
No, why would I give a shit about? I'm not being.
You're saying I gave money to charity. It wasn't about me feeling better about it. It was about
knowing that something,
hoping that something was being
has
done.
to happen. Now I am here in England. This child is already dead, but he has become a symbol for all those many children. By the way, the same year, 2015, the World Press winning photograph wasn't this one, but it was another photograph about the migrant crisis. It's a photograph, I haven't put it on here, but in some ways it's a more hopeful photograph. It's a baby being passed through the barbed wire.
Sure, yeah, I know that shot.
Yeah, it's a very sort of strange, timeless, grainy, black and white shot by an Australian, I can't remember his name actually. My line of looking. By the way, I had a parent of a child I teach sent me this photograph, and I had obviously already seen it. This happened maybe last year. We'd had a back and forth about something to do with the photography course. And she sent me this as an attachment, but she hadn't put anything with it, and I didn't know what I was opening. And I opened it, and it appeared very big on my screen at school. I was just alone in a classroom waiting for a class, I think. And the feeling of total wipeout, of fear, of sadness is like a tidal wave with this image. You know, I haven't really looked at it since it's been on the screen. That's why I've got these things in between, because I just can't stay with it for very long.
But you fundamentally, I think where you and I differ a little bit is I can look at these photographs. There is, I mean, the line that I would draw is some sort of like mutilation or something that would just be very, you know, viscerally gross like that. That's the stuff that is difficult for me to look at.
I did, when I was putting this together for our talk, I mean, as I said, I've taught this during the week at school. More of that in just a minute with the last photograph. But I did obviously have a sense that when I talk to you, I can show more maybe than I would show to a class of 15-year-olds.
But then you changed your mind?
I did change my mind because I realized I had chosen images by Larry Clark from Tulsa, of young people shooting up, looking at porn, and generally.
I do not like that series.
No, I don't like that series either. And then I thought to myself, there was an element of kind of self-congratulatoriness.
Oh, definitely. With that
and
stuff.
I didn't, that doesn't have a space in this presentation. So much as I don't like looking at those photographs. And
that stuff, by the way, that stuff definitely, if there's a line of sort of pornography or something like grandiose, just unnecessary, Tulsa's on the other side of that line for me.
Okay, so then the other thing I thought about putting in here was Joel Peter Witkin. And some of the shots where he's used severed heads or fetuses. And then I thought, no, because, you know, these people do not choose this.
Yep.
And so to me, then I sort of had to catch myself on a little bit there and say, no, it's not just about the art of the thing. This is about, hopefully, a meaningful sense of looking at photographs that are.
But I think where you and I separate though is that you, I think, ultimately feel as if, I guess what I was going to say is that the line of seeing images is pretty far along for me. The larger question that I have is, what is the purpose of me seeing these kinds of images? I have sort of come around to, I think, McCullen's idea of that. I don't know that these images actually change all that much. I think that they represent reality. I don't think they change. I don't think they help anything. And that I don't know that photojournalism changes the world the way photojournalists think that photojournalism changes the world.
So as lookers, as viewers, we're passive. Mostly we're passive. Yeah. And when we engage emotionally with photographs, it's for our own end.
I think part of it might be that I have outrage and frustration and anger and fear and sadness and all of these things about, I understand that there is evil in the world and that it's going on all around me. And I'm just constantly really upset about it. And what if I see a picture, it doesn't elucidate anything to me. It just sort of turns on the slideshow that I already have going on in my head. of things that I can do very little about.
Well, I wonder if photographs have to be functional. Now, I'm thinking back to being maybe about sort of 14 or 15, and I was on holiday in Tenerife with my dad. And there were some Spanish newspapers on a table in the apartment. And on the front cover of one, it was the Rwandan genocide, and it was a photograph of dead bodies on the front page. And to me, I'd never seen a photograph like that before.
They wouldn't put that on the front page of the Times of London or something.
No, I don't think so.
Yep.
Certainly not then. And I was, again, this idea of being like repulsed and yet transfixed by it. And I've never forgotten that photograph. Now, it's not important that I, Sandi Robertson, remember that photograph or forget that photograph. That's not really that important. But what did that photograph, me seeing that photograph, actually action to, in some way or in any way, contribute to the world?
Well, I think seeing that certainly widens your view of the world.
It does.
In the same way that I guess I'm talking about your students seeing the stuff in the tape.
Yes. So there is a similarity with that, because that marked me in the same way that, again, I think I've mentioned it in one of our other talks. Somebody bought me the Phaidon Press photo book when I first started having a real interest in photography, and flicking through it, there were images in that I otherwise probably would not have been allowed to look at, or that my mum might have censored in some way. And there's another remarkably similar photograph. I wonder if it is by Ut, actually. Don't know. Anyway, it's from, might be from the Korean War, actually, but very similar to the Alan Kurdi photograph.
Yeah. By the way, Nick, very nice guy.
Anyway, it's a farmer holding his dead child. Ugh. And the tank and the US Marine leaning over to speak to this farmer or communicate with him. It's taken from quite a distance, but the little child's body is rigid and it's face down in the father's arms. And I sort of remember seeing that photograph for the first time, and though the context of the photograph was something I did not live through, it was, again, the sense of total fear of seeing it, a repulsion at what I knew it was, and yet it holding me and forcing me to see something. Now, again, who the hell cares if Sandi Robertson from Scotland has seen a photograph of a dead child? But has it impacted the world in a positive way? Well, who knows, really? And it would only be really teeny.
To some extent, you could say, in your case, you could say that it has, in the sense that you have now become a teacher of other people and shown dozens and dozens of open the minds of dozens and dozens of other students about, all the terrible death and poverty in the world, but also all of the good things in the world. You know what I mean? Like you in some ways you are a walking diaspora of ideas.
I think that sounds amazing. Bill, that is the nicest thing you've ever said to me. Thank you.
Anytime.
Anyway, we're going to go to our last image.
Okay.
Which might seem a bit disconnected from the other two. This image is set up, it's posed, and it's not of death. It's this.
All right, what are we seeing here?
Okay, so it's by the Dutch artist Reneka Dixtra. And it's one of a series of 3 that she shot in 1994 of new mums, new mothers. Mm-hmm. She photographed Julie, and she photographed Saskia, and she photographed Tekla. And all of these women...
Tekla is a cool name.
They were all known to her. So they were either... One of them is, I think, her best friend, and the 2 others were friends of friends who she knew. So they're not complete strangers. And these women were photographed in their own homes. One, because in the Netherlands, it's more usual for mums to give birth at home than in a hospital. But these are what I think of as quite raw photographs. And for some people, these photographs are extraordinarily beautiful, just in the fact that these are new mothers. The reason why it finds its way into this presentation is because I showed this photograph in school on Wednesday morning to a group of Year 10 photographers. And they have never, ever been so troubled by any other photograph that I have ever shown them.
Really?
I have
By
shown.
the way, it is crazy to me that in America, if a teacher showed a full frontal nude woman to a group of 10th graders, she'd probably be fired.
Okay, well, I had my moment because during showing them this photograph, which at the time I was pairing with Dorothea Lang's migrant mother.
Interesting pairing. Okay.
Could explain that. I shan't right now. But one of the assistant head teachers walked in and she was absolutely stunned at what she was seeing. And there was a moment, and she said, "Marvelous." And she sort of did a bit of a salute and she walked out again.
Was there a half a beat there where you were terrified that like, oh boy?
No, because do you know what? I was showing this in context of migrant mother and the lines that we don't cross in photography.
In or out of context, I'm just saying that in America, it's funny the Puritanism that still remains in America. But go ahead.
But Bill, my point would be that actually this photograph of a young mum having given birth,
yep,
was so disgusting to this group of young people.
Oh, they thought this was gross.
They thought this was horrific. They couldn't look at it. They were absolutely aghast that I would dare show them it. They were aghast. Now, there's something I do want to talk about, and I think we could probably get a whole other show out of, is that the cultural signals about what women's bodies are and what they ought to look like for their age group does not come from the reality of what a woman's body probably looks like. It comes delivered to them through Instagram or TikTok or other platforms that are, well, they're looking at porn. They're looking at pornographic representations of female bodies. Now, not all porn has shaven, pneumatic boobed, blonde women. And by the way, not that that is anything to criticize, but if that is a kind of beauty standard within a porn industry that has filtered down into mainstream culture, and then that's what a 10th grader, as you call them, is going to think a female body ought to look like, and then they see this is utterly terrifying to them. And the line for them is this: they couldn't go to this. They would more happily look at this. And I'm using that word happily.
You think that's because they probably see a lot more images like the dead child than they do?
Yeah, I do think there's a desensitization, but also I would say is the year above them, who are in current year 11, were the group that I took to see the Mccullen exhibition.
Yep.
And they had a totally different reaction to those photographs by Mccullen.
So that's interesting. So it's not about kids of a particular age, it's about that particular group of kids.
Maybe, but I would say actually that the group that went to the Mccullen show are just especially sensitive individuals. Yeah. Very thoughtful indeed. They're almost like an anomaly group, and I'm not saying that my students are thoughtless, but I do find it interesting that this image caused so much suffering in the group. And it's in part, forget about the blood dripping down the leg. Yep. It's things like her pubic hair.
Sure.
They just couldn't handle that at all.
Which is funny because this is not, completely unkept pubic hair or any way. You know what I'm saying? Like this is also not somebody who doesn't abide by, some level of Western personscaping. You know what I'm saying? I'm saying like even this person has obviously trimmed their pubic hair in this photograph, you know, versus probably. So it's funny how like this is a very normal person in any Western sense, and those kids couldn't handle it.
They couldn't handle it.
Boys different than girls?
Well, I'm just going to read something that Reneka Dixtra herself said.
Sure.
So she had by the way, something else that I think is interesting is the same year she was making these photographs, and she made only 3 of the new mums. She traveled to Portugal and she made photographs of matadors, and they were coming out of the bull ring, and she'd photographed them when they were still in that state of being, I guess, pumped with adrenaline.
Yep.
And yet, you know, not perhaps having let everything sink in fully from what they just experienced. And in terms of talking about Dijkstra on the Tate website, they describe what she's interested in as being photography of people at a time when they do not have everything under control.
No, that's interesting.
Now, I'm not going to make too much of a leap to say that this photograph is in any way similar to the other 2 we've looked at tonight, but they are all under that same very broad umbrella of things that are outside the control of the people who are the experiencers within the frame.
It is, however, interesting though that, you know, the first 2 photographs are of death, but are of like a tragic death. I mean, if you could put this photograph next to, you know, Annie Leibowitz's photographs of Susan Sontag's dead body or something. You know what I mean? Like you could show sort of circle of life, things that are just a matter of life and death that some people might find disturbing. But this is a very, this has to happen in order for more people to live. People are going to eventually die of things like cancer and whatever. A little kid dying a terrible death drowning or a girl killed on the street by, you know, a stray bullet or was shot or whatever are very different than sort of life cycle moments, you know, examples of human life cycle kind of things like this would be to me. Does that make sense? Am I making any sense at all?
Yeah.
It's funny that this should be very normal to anybody ultimately.
Well, again, that's also maybe in part the why it sort of wound up here, is that this is so normal to me. And yet to so many other people, it absolutely is not. And yet, so this isn't normal to me.
Right.
And yet it seems that sadly, so many others have become incredibly desensitized to it.
Well, our media
and it
plays up
becomes
things
normalized.
like this. Yeah. Sure.
This has become normalized.
Yep.
This is not normal.
No.
And yet,
but it is normal news journalism fare.
Yes, but again, coming back to the sort of title of the thing, which is, you know, the line of looking, many more people seem to be able to look at this image
Yep.
than look at this image.
But that's totally about desensitization, like you were saying.
Well,
in my opinion.
Yeah, it's also about I think it's about the cultural signals our current photographs send to our young people.
Sure.
The cultural signals that come from, for example, pornography and representations of the female body. And no matter how hard people think that we sort of strive towards equality in some way, Reneka Dixtra herself said, she was talking about these people that she kind of encounters in photographs. It's amazing that they trust me. And I think that afterwards they understand that these photos are about something universal and that it's not particularly about them. The first show I had in Amsterdam with these photographs, a lot of women came to me and said, you know, it's really great that you make these photographs because it's really the way it is, but nobody ever shows it. And I can recognize myself in it. And the men were all like, you can't show a woman like that.
Why would somebody say that, you think?
Because
I wonder if for the men, do you think it's because it makes them uncomfortable, or do you think the men think that is somehow disrespectful of the woman to show her in such, uh, I mean, this is a moment of vulnerability, probably, you know?
all these photographs are photographs of vulnerability.
Sure. Yeah. 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 But I mean, but this one is done for art, not for journalism. Does that change it?
Hmm. A celebration of the birthing body, a celebration of all things that are abundant and life-giving, and we can't look at it.
Well, some people can't look at it. I'll look at it with you, Sandi.
Thank you, Bill. Anyway, I have to say, Vicky, you were amazing coming into that room and just standing there and going, marvelous. And then walking out and then in the corridor later saying it was great that you showed that.
Well, that's, yeah, I'm glad it worked out that way and not another way.
Well, maybe there's a raft of parent complaints just waiting for me in my school email. Who knows?
Exactly.
But the line of looking, Bill, have we crossed it tonight?
I don't think that there's any line that you and I can't cross together.
Oh, Bill. But just before we finish, I do wonder about this. Is there a photograph that you can recall that's taken you way past where you feel okay anymore looking? Where you've been moved so much into a position of sadness or fear?
I think that those images that we looked at a few weeks ago of the guy beating up his girlfriend, remember how angry I got about that?
You did get angry about that.
Yeah. I mean, those are the kinds of things that really anger me.
In fact,
because
we talked about you.
Yeah.
My class talked about your reaction to those photographs as part of our studies in the right to photograph. And lots of
What
them
did they
cited
think?
you. Lots of them cited you then in how that sort of somehow enabled them to look at the photographs. Gave them kind of like a voice that, you know, it's okay to feel angry about these photographs.
Oh,
And
interesting. Okay.
isn't that absurd as well?
That they didn't think that they had the right to be angry or frustrated by them?
Like the right to photograph. Well, it's also the right to react to the photograph.
Sure, of course. Yeah. I mean, I think those kinds of things are the things that bother me. I look at this and I think, okay, maybe it's not the case, but me as an individual, do I have the right to not want to see a woman who just had a baby nude? Okay. Yeah. Okay. I guess I do have that right. But I can just not look at it. But if I do look at it or don't look at it, it's not changing the world. I mean, somebody's making Dijkstra is making a statement here. Whether or not I internalize it is one thing. The deaths of the children earlier in the other two images, all these photographs are after the fact. You can't do anything about those. You know, the child's dead and you're taking a picture. Well, you're just sort of recording what has happened in post. The things that bother me are sort of it's in the moment and something could have been done and I don't feel like something had been done. Those are the ones that I have a much harder time with. Because I feel like it's like an opportunity wasted in order to make the world a better place. But that's my own feelings, and that's coming from a kid who's dealt with abuse from parents, and this, you know what I mean, like has been through some stuff and knows what it feels like to be on the other side of that line. So I generally want to use whatever power I do have in order to. I was talking to somebody this morning and they were saying that, you know, there's a Seinfeld joke that all men think that they're a superhero and can actually, you know, the reality is that we're not. But I feel like if you're angry enough and have enough adrenaline, you can do something and fix the world, you know, in some sort of childlike dream. So those are the things that cross the line for me. It's not things like this. But again, I am a little squeamish when things get to, mutilated bodies and that kind of stuff.
I mean, the other one that I was going to show, and I
Oh yeah, wait, there's one. The photograph of the dead body that Jack the Ripper killed. Did you ever see that photograph?
no.
It's like this woman and like her whole torso is just like ripped up. And it's like that. That's just awful. It's like crime scene photo kind of stuff. Like that. Those are the things that are too much for me.
Now, I was looking at the work by Iraqi from his series, The Sentimental Journey. Started with his wife when they were on their wedding day, through their honeymoon, through their life together, into her illness and then her death. And I mean, Iraqi is best known probably for his photographs of women who are bound and tied. I can't remember what the Japanese word is for that. It's a very sort of particular kind of bondage.
Yep.
And his work's often, hugely criticized, very subversive. But The Sentimental Journey is about really the relationship with his wife. And one of the photographs, once she has died, and then we see her in her coffin surrounded by these beautiful flowers. And I could look at the photograph all day long. It's so beautiful. And it's so tender. Now, that is a death of a woman who has not, she's not that she's chosen death, but she's not died at the hands of another person.
Yeah.
Does
seeing pictures like that, like I've lost my father to cancer. I've lost my grandfather to cancer. My friend is pretty sick with cancer. I've watched people die that I've loved. I generally avoid looking at photographs like that. A friend of mine, both of her parents died within a year of each other, 6 months of each other of cancer. And she did a whole book series about it. And it's like, I can't look at those photographs. To me, my visceral fear of that happening to me or my wife, or one of us having to be without the other because of some terrible long-term illness, that's my biggest fear. That's the fear that kept me terrified of becoming married in the first place, so it's like, I know that there's a chance that that is going to happen to me. I don't need to constantly relive the experience of others who have gone through that. I'm already scared of it enough myself. You know what I mean? That only upsets me looking at that, where some people, I think, find some level of comfort and solace in understanding what happens and why it happens and how it happens, and somehow demystifying it brings comfort. I just find it terrifying. Like, that's the kind of stuff that keeps me up at night. So there's like different ways. I think people are coming into these photographs and these images and all these ideas from a very different place based upon their own experiences. And I think that changes things as much as the meaning that the photographs inherently have or do not have. Yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
I am listening intently, Bill.
Man, this was a heavy one.
Well, thank you for going through it with me.
When are we talking about pictures of sports fans or something, or birds? Birds. We could take pictures of birds.
I'm scared of birds.
Cute puppies.
Smelly.
You don't like puppies?
Well, yeah, Bill Wadman, thank you.
Thank you, Sandi.